So yesterday, President Vladimir Putin had a little spat with his chef that made international news. If you're unaware, Prigozhin also owns a restaurant in Moscow, which Putin visits quite frequently, and this is how he got the nickname of Putin's personal chef. But he is also in charge of the Wagner Group, a private military company which Russia has used in the past and is still using it as an extension of its military. It's so that it can deny involvement in various international conflicts. So, for example, in Crimea, the Wagner Group were the little green men that had no affiliation with Russia, and they just appeared over there, and they were fighting on behalf of the separatists. It's also so that Russia can deny the levels of casualties that can happen in a conflict. Soldiers in caskets don't look really well on TV. The old ladies back home do not appreciate that type of news. But dead mercenaries are rarely making it into the polls that the mainstream media gives to the public. So that's another plausible deniability. So, as you can see, in de jure, as the political analysts like to say, the Wagner Group is not part of the Russian military. De facto, it is. And this is where the actual conflict stemmed from. Some of the mercenaries, which had their contracts expire during the conflict with Ukraine, prefer to leave, much to the disappointment of the Russian military. Because it's one thing when you're fighting against some forces in the Middle East that do not have the technology to oppose you. And it's another thing when you're fighting against the Ukrainians, which have NATO-grade gear. And this is where the confrontation between the Wagner Group and Russia's high command has started. They wanted to enroll their mercenaries into the official military. However, many of the mercenaries didn't appreciate that, not only because when they enrolled, they didn't think that they're going to be deployed in the Ukrainian conflict, where they have seen some of the toughest battles. The Wagner Group is actually one of the few groups that have scored significant victories, which also came at a very high price, giving these men battle fatigue. But also the fact that their pay would have been very diminished if they joined the military. So from 10,000 a month all the way to 1,000, which is what a soldier is getting paid. So as you can imagine, these men weren't happy to sign a new contract and be enrolled in the military. But other mercenary groups have signed. So, for example, the Chechens, I understand many of them did sign. But Wagner Group refused, and this is what brought the ire of the Russian high command. And there has been tensions for the last month, and a lot of back and forth, with a very famous video of Prigozhin showing a mountain of dead bodies and saying that the reason those men died is because Russia isn't giving them ammunition. And he claimed that he's only getting 30% of the required ammunition, and the casualties would drop significantly if they were being armed properly. And these types of videos make the Russian command look very unpopular, especially after a couple of weeks. We also had an incident where an officer was rallying his men for an inspirational speech, who was several hours late, and because the soldiers were grouped up, they were excellent target practice for the Ukrainian artillery. And this incident enraged even the most loyalist Russian bloggers, which posted on the internet various insults and disappointment and disapproval towards the military command. So taking into consideration that the Ministry of Defense doesn't need any more help to embarrass himself, does not appreciate when Prigozhin was helping his embarrassment along by talking about the fact that there's a huge lack of ammunition. So now there's an arrest warrant on his name. As you can imagine, this displeased him, and probably displeased his soldiers as well. And it all culminated when a missile was dropped on top of his men. This is something that Prigozhin claims. The Russian high command denies that this occurred. But regardless, it was enough to convince the Wagner Group to march on Moscow. Now, this was concerning in and of itself for Putin, but what was probably even more concerning was the fact that many of the people from Moscow were cheering and they were supporting the Wagner Group. as well as several soldiers refusing to follow orders and opening fire on the mercenary turncoats. Now, it's difficult to say if this actually happened because the fog of war is a thing. This is what the Wagner Group claims, but the Russian military denies. It could also be due to the fact that the onboard computer identify friend or foe system would probably light up the Wagner Group as being friendly, as they would still use the same codes, and the soldier would have seen, it's like, what, you want me to open fire on Russian forces? Like, no. It's difficult to tell, and this information is probably never going to be made available to the public of what happened exactly, especially now that a deal has been made. There are no interests of this information made available. Like, imagine if they actually did shoot down a Russian helicopter, as video evidence suggests. Explain that to the families of the soldiers. It's like, well, the mercenaries shot down the helicopter, but why? Well, your son was following orders. So is anyone going to go to prison for this? Like, are we going to get any justice? It's a conversation that's very difficult to happen. And this is why I don't think that the events of this are going to be discussed much in the press, if ever. So take that into consideration. The second problem for the Russian High Command was the occupation of a city which is vital for the war effort. A lot of logistical supplies go through that city, and the Wagner forces occupied it very quickly. Because again, the people defending the city refused to follow orders, and they refused to open fire. So if Prigozhin had any lick of sense, he would confiscate many of the supplies and use that as a bargaining chip in order to broker a deal. Something that I assume he probably did, and I do think he has a lick of sense, because otherwise he wouldn't be alive for so long. So as he's marching to Moscow, tensions are high. The Russian High Command starts defending the city. And take into account that this siege that he was planning was incredibly unlikely to be successful. Moscow is one of the most defended cities in the world. America believes that they have a military police, but you haven't seen the police that the Russians have. However, it did show a little bit of weakness within the Russian forces. The fact that they were caught unprepared for this, the fact that the Russian military wasn't deployed in time, like many of the military forces didn't even arrive at the city, as it was up to the military police to do most of the defending. Still, significant enough forces to hold back the Wagner Group if they tried to attempt something. But as this is going on and political analysts are very concerned and Putin has a speech, you have President Lukashenko from Belarus brokering a deal between Prigozhin and I guess the Russian people. And the deal seems to be that he is now guaranteed safety, but he is forced to go into exile in Belarus. So that's the end of that, apparently. The Wagner Group is receiving full immunity. The charges against Prigozhin are being lifted. So we don't really know what's going to happen at this point because the situation is still unfolding. However, we do know the reactions of many of the people from the Wagner Group. Some of them are incredibly upset. They feel betrayed. They feel that they've been sold out, while others are incredibly happy that they don't have to shoot against their brothers. As for the Russian population, I assume that their views are also quite different. Some of them are viewing Putin as weak, that this was allowed to happen. Other people are viewing Putin as very strong, that this was solved in a peaceful manner without any bloodshed. It's difficult to assess because you're not going to get a poll that makes Putin look bad, especially during wartime effort. But all in all, I do think that China and North Korea are very concerned looking at what happened, as of course, this coup, in my opinion, could not have been successful unless there were strong forces within the Russian High Command that would have allied with the Wagner Group. But overwhelmingly, it's very unlikely. Even with 25,000 men, it's very difficult to take Moscow. And even if you take Moscow, then what? I mean, there have been other famous people throughout history that have took Moscow. And then what? Like Napoleon, for example. So it's a very difficult and tenuous situation, but there wasn't many chances of this being successful. Still, the very fact that it happened, though, and the fact that your own mercenary forces turned against you. I mean, imagine if in the United States you had Blackwater or some other paramilitary organization that started marching up until Washington, and the military would just allow them. I mean, imagine what the news would be like. Okay, like so. Imagine how the people in power would have been viewed. Well, actually, maybe not, because America isn't using strength as a means of virtue, right? Like, but the Russians do view strength as a means of virtue. Like they want a strong leader, because otherwise they have no respect for him. It's why Prigozhin is actually viewed so well. It's because he displays strength. Same with Putin, right? Like, he displays strength. Meanwhile, in the United States, I don't think that people like Joe Biden because he displays strength. Maybe there are a few individuals, I don't know, but it would be interesting. They have other virtues that they display, which people accept. But yeah, so this is what happened. The events are still transpiring. Things unfolded so quickly that many YouTubers were recording videos about, like, is it a civil war? Is it starting? Is it on? And by the time they uploaded the video, it was off. As such, I do think that it's unlikely anything will happen today. The Ukrainian forces didn't seem to have scored many victories or even managed to benefit from this situation, either than gain a few meters on the battleground. There are people who call this a psyop. I mean, if it is, it's a very unsuccessful one. Other people call this a distraction. That's right, it distracts people from my Subscribestar, which is the best place you can get buyer's remorse on the internet. There's a link into the pinned comment if you want to give me a tip or a small donation. You can do so there, or you can give me a super thanks as well. Take into account these events are meant to distract you from that. I find it hilarious. Every single time there's like something newsworthy, people are like, it's a distraction, it's a distraction. Like, from what though? What, like, people keep getting this, from what? Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.